People used to say we were lucky, lucky to have met so young, lucky to have grown together, lucky that our love looked so steady in a world full of broken things. When Aaron held my hand in public, when he smiled for photos, when he spoke proudly of my wife, everyone believed our story was solid and safe. I believed it too for a long time. We met when life was simple, when dreams felt light enough to carry without fear. Aaron had ambition pouring out of him, big plans, big confidence. I admired that. I loved how certain he was about where he was going. And when he asked me to walk beside him, I said yes without hesitation. At first, marriage felt like teamwork. We celebrated small wins together, planned futures late into the night, laughed over cheap dinners and shared hopes. But somewhere along the way, the balance shifted so slowly I didn't notice until I was standing completely on his side of the scale. When his job demanded longer hours, I adjusted. When his career required relocation, I packed. When my own goals conflicted with his timeline, I postponed mine. I'll get back to them later. I told myself. Later never came. I became the organizer of his life. The reminders, the emotional support, the quiet encouragement after hard days. I learned how to shrink my needs so they wouldn't overwhelm him. If I was tired, I pushed through. If I was hurt, I softened my words. If I was unhappy, I told myself marriage wasn't supposed to be easy. He called it loyalty. I called it love. What I didn't see then was how invisible I was becoming. My friends noticed before I did. They'd ask why I never talked about my work anymore, why my laughter sounded rehearsed, why I always checked with Aaron before making the smallest plans. I brushed it off. We're just busy. I'd say, this is what building a life looks like. But building his life meant dismantling mine. The house we lived in reflected his taste. The schedule followed his priorities. Even our conversations centered around his stress, his goals, his future. When I tried to talk about my dreams, they were met with distraction or gentle dismissal. Later, he'd say, "Let's focus on what matters right now." I started wondering when I stopped mattering. Still, from the outside, we were perfect. Smiling photos, holiday gatherings, compliments about how strong our marriage was. I played my role well too well. I learned how to wear contentment like makeup, hiding the cracks underneath. At night, lying beside him, I sometimes felt lonelier than I ever had alone. He'd fall asleep quickly, exhausted from a life I helped build, while I stared at the ceiling, counting the sacrifices I never spoke aloud. I told myself love meant staying. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself he needed me. What I didn't tell myself, what I wasn't ready to admit, was that I was disappearing piece by piece, and the man I trusted with my heart wasn't looking back to see if I was still there. By the time the truth revealed itself, I had already given him everything, and I had no idea how much it would cost me. The end of our marriage didn't arrive with screaming or slammed doors. It came quietly, wrapped in calm words and practiced expressions, like something Aaron had rehearsed long before I ever knew the lines. "We need to talk," he said one evening, his voice steady, almost kind. I remember the way my stomach tightened, as if my body understood before my heart could catch up. He didn't look angry. He didn't look sad either. He looked relieved. He told me he'd been unhappy for a while, that we'd grown apart, that people change. Each sentence landed softly, but together they crushed me. I sat there, nodding, trying to process how a decade of shared life could be reduced to a few carefully chosen phrases. When I asked if there was someone else, he didn't answer right away. The pause was enough. The days that followed felt unreal. Conversations turned into logistics. Emotions were replaced by schedules and paperwork. Aaron moved through it all with efficiency, like a man checking items off a list. Meanwhile, I was still stuck on the first page, rereading the same painful paragraph over and over. Then came the divorce. I assumed fairness would guide it. I believed history mattered, that the years of support, the sacrifices, the way I'd put my life on hold would count for something. I was wrong. His lawyer spoke for him. His confidence filled the room. Documents were slid across the table with language I barely understood. He had prepared, I had trusted. By the time it was over, the truth settled in slowly, painfully. He kept the house, the one I'd turned into a home. He kept the majority of the savings built from joint effort. He kept the business assets grown with my unpaid labor and emotional support. I was left with what the paperwork called personal belongings, as if memories could be itemized and boxed. I packed my life into suitcases, each one heavier than the last. Every room I emptied echoed with the sound of something ending. The kitchen where I cooked his favorite meals. The living room where we planned our future. The bedroom where I cried quietly so he wouldn't hear. On my final day there, I stood in the doorway and took one last look. He was already acting like it was his space alone. My absence didn't disturb him. That hurt more than the loss itself. "You'll be okay," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You always are." It sounded like comfort. It felt like dismissal. I walked out with 2 suitcases, a box of old photos, and a silence that followed me all the way to my temporary apartment. The walls there were bare. The nights were too quiet. I slept on a borrowed bed, surrounded by unfamiliar smells, wondering how I had gone from being someone's partner to an afterthought. Anger came later. First there was shock, then grief, then a deep, aching sense of betrayal, not just by him, but by myself. I had trusted, I had given freely, I had believed love meant protection. Instead, it left me stripped of everything familiar. Aaron took the life we built, the stability, the comfort, the security. He walked away intact, confident, certain he'd won. What he didn't realize, what I didn't realize yet, was that in taking everything, he had also taken me to the very edge of myself. And that was where the real story was about to begin. Losing everything didn't happen all at once. It came in quiet moments, standing in a grocery aisle calculating prices, waking up alone in a room that didn't feel like mine, realizing no one would notice if I didn't speak for days. That kind of loss doesn't scream, it whispers. At first, I lived on survival. I took work wherever I could find it, told myself it was temporary, that I'd figure things out soon. Every day felt like walking on uneven ground, unsure where my footing would give out. I was tired in ways sleep couldn't fix. But something strange happened when there was nothing left to protect. Without a marriage to maintain, without expectations to meet, without someone else's life orbiting my every decision, I felt an unfamiliar stillness. Scary at first, but honest. I started listening to myself again. I remembered the skills I'd buried for years. The ideas I once shared excitedly before they were labeled impractical or unnecessary. I opened old notebooks filled with plans I never followed, dreams I postponed until they faded into the background. They were still there. I began working nights, teaching myself what I needed to know, rebuilding confidence piece by piece. I reached out to contacts I'd helped quietly in the past, people who remembered my contribution even when my own husband hadn't acknowledged it. Doors opened slowly, one project turned into another, small wins stacked up, not enough to impress anyone else, but enough to remind me I wasn't broken. The biggest shift wasn't financial, it was emotional. For the first time in years, no one interrupted me when I spoke. No one minimized my concerns or brushed off my exhaustion. I wasn't too much or not enough. I was simply enough. I started choosing differently, choosing rest without guilt, choosing work that respected my time, choosing friendships that didn't require me to shrink. Healing wasn't linear. Some days anger surged back unexpectedly. I'd replay moments from the marriage, realizing how often my needs had been dismissed, How often I'd apologized for wanting basic respect. The betrayal stung sharper once I saw it clearly, but clarity brought power. I stopped asking why he did what he did and started asking why I had stayed. The answer wasn't weakness, it was hope, and hope, I realized, didn't make me foolish, it made me human. As months passed, the woman in the mirror began to look different, not younger, not flawless, but grounded. Steady, real, the fear in my eyes softened. My posture changed, I took up space again. One afternoon, while reviewing a contract for my growing business, I paused and laughed, an unguarded sound that surprised me. This life, the one I was building from scraps, felt more honest than the one I'd lost. That was when it hit me. Aaron hadn't taken my future. He hadn't taken my intelligence. He hadn't taken my ability to create, adapt, and rise. What he had taken was comfort, the illusion of safety I'd wrapped around a life that was quietly draining me. And in exchange, I had gained myself. I didn't need him to regret anything. I didn't need apologies or explanations. I was too busy becoming someone I respected. What he thought he took was everything. What he actually took was the last excuse I had for not stepping into my own power. And once I understood that, there was no going back. I didn't plan revenge. It arrived on its own, quietly, the way healing does when you stop chasing it. There was no dramatic moment where I vowed to prove him wrong. No list of things I wanted Aaron to see or feel. By the time my life began to feel whole again, he was no longer the center of the story. Peace has a way of changing your priorities. My work grew steadily, not explosively, not overnight, but honestly. Clients came because they trusted me, because I listened, because I delivered. I built something from the ground up, something that carried my name and my values. The money followed eventually, but it wasn't the victory I cared about most. Freedom was. I moved into a place that felt like mine the moment I stepped inside. Sunlight poured through the windows in the morning. The walls waited for my choices, my colors, my life. I filled the space slowly, intentionally, without asking anyone's permission. There was joy in the smallest things, quiet mornings, music playing while I cooked, laughter that didn't feel forced. I no longer braced myself before speaking. I no longer measured my worth by how useful I was to someone else. Then, unexpectedly, I saw him. It was an ordinary afternoon, a cafe I liked, a break between meetings. He walked in and froze when he noticed me. Time slowed, just enough for recognition to settle in his eyes. "You look good," he said, unsure. I smiled, not out of politeness, not out of bitterness, but because I meant it when I said, "I am." We talked briefly. Surface-level words, weather, work, nothing important, but beneath it all, I could feel the shift. He searched my face for something familiar: resentment, longing, regret. He didn't find it. He looked tired, not in a dramatic way, just worn around the edges. The confidence he once carried so easily seemed heavier now. When he mentioned the house, the business, the life he'd kept, his voice lacked the certainty it once had. For the first time, I understood something clearly. He had won the divorce, but he had lost the woman who made his victories feel meaningful. I didn't need to say anything sharp or clever. My life spoke for me, the calm in my voice, the way I met his eyes without flinching. The ease I carried like a quiet truth, that was the sweetest revenge of all. Walking away from that cafe, I felt no triumph, only gratitude. For the pain that pushed me to grow, for the loss that forced me to choose myself, for the version of me who survived the worst and built something better. I no longer measured my life by what was taken from me. I measured it by what could never be taken again. My voice, my confidence, my sense of self. Aaron took everything he could see. What he couldn't see, what he never understood, was that he was taking me to the moment where I would finally stop living for anyone else. And that was something he could never touch, the end.